On this episode of Who Dem.
They can do it to a sitting, U.S. senator, the senior senator from California. What hope is there for the rest of us?
It's everything that they do. Everything is performative with the intention of being provocative.
He sees every Latino person, whether you're here or not or whatever, to me, in my opinion, as just, you don't belong here.
Yeah.
Right?
I think he's just jealous of the tan.
He's
been trying to get it going for a while now. And we're rolling. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Who Dem podcast. My name is Damian Galvan, and as always, I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Representative Gil Cisneros. We have a lot of things to talk about today. I think the first thing that we should start with is what happened with Senator Padilla yesterday. Mm-hmm. This is terrifying. The Democratic response, I think, has been perfect. If this can happen to a senator, this can happen to anyone.
I mean, 100%, right? It's just unbelievable. And the lies that they told after it, right? Ice Barbie coming out and saying, well, he didn't identify himself, or, he was lunging towards the podium. But when you watch every video, right, there's no podium.
Yeah.
She's not even in the picture. It's just crazy, right? And she called it political theatrics, but yet right after that, she went right on Fox News to go and talk about, right, to kind of frame the situation in the way that they want it.
Yeah.
Again, like you said, right, to a sitting, U.S. senator, the senior senator from California. What hope is there for the rest of us?
Yeah. Ice Barbie. I like that line. I'm going to start using that because, I mean, it is ridiculous. And it's the other layer to it is that they're lying straight to our faces. I mean, even the videos that they were responding to saying that Senator Padilla didn't identify himself, they start with him identifying himself.
You can clearly hear him in the video saying, I'm Senator Alex Padilla.
Yes. Yeah. It's ridiculous. And the other element to it, too, is I think that there's a certain level of irony in them explaining that it is dangerous for someone to, lunge at someone or make an effort at someone, try to grab someone without identifying themselves. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, they're sending in ICE agents with masks, often in plain clothing.
Right, plain clothing, plain vehicles.
Exactly.
They're using rented minivans. Same van we have. That we drive the kids around in it. It's just. Yeah, and they're going after people, right? And what's going on right now in California is just rounding people up, right? We had some people in our district that got picked up while they were walking to lunch. The landscapers right there. I remember I saw a video of a guy being pulled out of his truck. Yeah. You could see all his equipment, the lawnmowers and the weed blower or the weed whackers and everything in the back of his truck. As they're putting handcuffs on them.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And they're targeting places where people are working. I saw the other day, ICE tweeted that they raided a meat packing facility. And it's ridiculous because, again, the whole thing that Trump ran on, and we all knew that this wasn't going to be the case. We knew that when he said that he was going to deport the worst of the worst, he wasn't going to deport the worst of the worst for many reasons. First and foremost, it's extremely difficult to do that. Logistically speaking, it's difficult to go in and not have, or have targeted operations like that and not drag other people that are a part of the community into it. And it's also so interesting to now see Trump kind of walk back some of these things. I don't know if you saw his post on Truth Social yesterday, but he was talking about how the great farmers of America and the great hospitality workers of America are complaining to him that they're losing their employees, some of which are irreplaceable. And so he said that big changes are coming. And I think late last night, he now said that he's no longer going to be targeting laborers.
Yeah, this past week, right, we got paid a visit by the agricultural groups, right, that are in town kind of advocating for their stuff and their business. And one of the things they talked to me about that was the fact that they're losing their workforce. And, California is the biggest agricultural state in the country. Nearly half of those workers that work in there are undocumented. Obviously they were in town, and I did ask them, you you all need to make sure you go to the White House and send this message to him. And I guess apparently they did.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Because they, went and came back and said that, like you said, then you get this message from the Trump that, well, we're going to pull back. But I take it with a grain of salt, right? I will believe it when I see it.
Yeah.
Just the fact that he says it doesn't mean that he's going to do it, because we all know he's a big fat liar.
Yeah, no,
right?
Exactly. And he forgets. He'll forget that he said it. And he won't remember.
Yeah, and all he needs is Stephen Miller, like, to be in his ear today or tomorrow to say, like, hey, we got to get these numbers back up. We're losing ground here. We're losing momentum with I think where people are starting to talk about, the bad economy and the tariffs and everything else, and so we need to start deporting more people again.
Yeah, and I think Stephen Miller must be pissed at him, because part of the strategy from the Republicans was saying that they're only targeting criminals, that they're targeting the worst of the worst. And even with these raids that we're seeing going on in California, where they're going to schools, they're going to people where places work. Like you said, they're pulling people over that are clearly in vehicles that are meant for doing day labor. It's so, here you go. Stephen Miller being upset with Trump because Trump took the mask off. And he said that, as a matter of fact, we were targeting day laborers, and we were targeting people that work at farms. We were targeting hospitality workers, but changes are coming now.
Well, look, Stephen Miller has demanded a quota, right? He had a meeting where he had all these people come in, and from Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs, and, yell at them that they weren't, we need to get the numbers up, right? But they want to give this impression with these falsehoods, right? That there are all these individuals that are here, they're causing havoc. And Trump said it, right? He said it when, when he first decided he was going to run for president back in 2016. They're sending us their criminals, their rapists, their, all their bad elements. That's who's coming here, right? And we know that's not true, right? Because who they're seeing, who are they? They're not going after the bad elements. These violent, supposedly, they're all violent criminals. They're all the worst of the worst. But the only people they can find are those that are here working, trying to live the American dream of making a better life for themselves. And that's who they're rounding up. And it's not people who are doing things bad or doing things illegally, right? They are going after people who are, doing their check-ins like they're required to do. We heard the story of them pulling somebody out who was going to take his test for citizenship.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous how bad this is, right? And they're racially profiling people. They are going after, you have an accent. It's like, boom, okay, you must be undocumented, right?
Yeah.
You got brown skin. You must be undocumented, right? You're doing this type of work. You're probably not meant to be here, right? If you're one of those, like you said, day laborers, or you're, serving as a server or somewhere in the hospitality industry or farm labor, then you must be, they're racially profiling you to be an undocumented individual, and they're just rounding you up no matter what, regardless of your status.
Yeah. And my background, obviously, with what happened to me in the immigration process with my father, gave me some level of nuance to the situation. And then another thing that also, helped me was my first job was actually at an immigration law firm in Atlanta. An interesting story. It was actually the law firm that represented my dad. Like a couple years later, after his process, I was looking for an internship, and I emailed the attorney, and she was like, yeah, you know what? Email me a year later and we'll see what we can do. I sent her the first day of January 2020. What was it? 2021 or 2022, it must have been. Sent her an email, worked there for about a year and a half, and that gave me a lot of perspective that I didn't have before. I wanted to go into law. I've wanted to go into law for my whole life, since I was 8 years old. My parents always told me, you like arguing so much, why don't you become an attorney?
Yeah.
And I wanted to do that, but I never wanted to do immigration law, specifically because of, what had happened with my situation growing up. I just wanted to stay away from it.
Yeah.
And what working there really offered me the opportunity to see is the level of complexity that the immigration system has, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people think that it is a very simple process. That you know, I see these articles about someone that was deported after having lived here for 20 years, and some of the comments are like, "Well, if she lived here for 20 years, why didn't she get her citizenship?" It's not that simple, right?
Right.
A lot of these people are actually a lot of the people that are being actively deported right now are in the process of figuring out their status.
Yeah.
And how do you expect people to want to figure out their legal situation, to go to their citizenship interviews, to go and sit down with their attorney when there's the potential that going to resolve their immigration problem is going to result in them being deported?
Yeah.
I was hearing the story of this man that he went to his father's citizenship proceeding, his citizenship interview, and before he went in, he hugged him.
Yeah.
Because he didn't know if he was going to see him afterwards.
Right.
It's devastating.
No, I mean, it's just what they're doing right now is just. I just had to take a moment yesterday. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Right?
Yeah.
What country am I living in? What time is this? What point in history are we in that this is actually going on? In this country that I love so much.
Yeah, and it's also so interesting to see it happen from the GOP. Obviously, if you're my age and you grew up with the Trumps and, the Stephen Millers and all of these terrible individuals, you would say, well, of course the Republican Party hates immigrants. Of course the Republican Party, wants to deport all of these people. But if you go back and you look at my favorite example is the Bush Reagan. I don't know if it was a debate or if they were just doing a conversation on a stage, but it's Bush and Reagan talking, and Bush is saying these immigrants they're valuable to our community. He ends by saying half my family is Mexican, or a big portion of my family is Mexican.
Yeah.
And then Reagan picks up where he left off and said, we need to treat them with humanity. They come to this country looking for a better life, and to see it's not a 180 because I think at this point they're dizzy. They've been doing circles and circles and circles. To see the switch up from the Republican Party and to see where they have fallen from that point is just I don't know.
Jimmy Kimmel had this. I think it was a couple days ago. He had this great thing, part of his monologue, where he talked about he showed clips going all the way back to Eisenhower, with the presidents talking, about immigration and how important it was to the country, and he had, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Ford, Carter, Reagan, I think both Bushes, Obama, and then they show Trump. With a clip of him talking about they're eating the cats, and it's just like the contrast between everything, right? And, on social media a lot, you've been seeing a lot of clips of Reagan. They're playing Reagan's last speech that he gave, and he said, "This is my last speech I'll give as president." And it was about immigration and the importance of it, and about people seeing the United States as this beacon of hope. Of wanting to live the American dream. And it is just kind of, when you think about it, right, how things have changed in that party, right, about how bad. I mean, even George W., right, wanted to, support immigration. I think that was around the time where you could kind of start to see things were changing, right, because he was kind of advocating for well, hey, let's kind of, how do we support immigration? And some people are like, oh, no, we can't do that. We can't do that, right?
Yeah.
And I think that was around the time you just started to see how things were changing in that party where, all of a sudden, being an immigrant was, was like being a villain.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite posts that I've seen is that the greatest service that anyone has done to people's perception of George W. Bush's ability to orate or speak has been Donald Trump, because he makes him look like Martin Luther King with the way that he can speak comparatively.
Yeah. But he's like William Jennings Bryan, right, compared to to Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump just, I feel like he is a random word generator. You ever send, how on the top of your phone, it suggests words? If you just keep clicking it'll give you a Donald Trump speech. It's just, it's random words.
Yeah.
He doesn't actually know what he's saying at any time. And like I said, he'll forget one statement that he makes one day, he forgets it the next day.
Yeah.
At least Bush could remember the things that he said.
I guess that's this new world we live in, right? Where, and we've talked about this, right? About the kind of being on a podcast, so like, oh, you got to keep it real, and if you make a mistake, that's okay, and it's just kind of like the talking. But in a sense, that's really how Donald Trump is, right? Yeah. He just kind of rambles. I guess because he rambles, people can say, oh, he's keeping it real.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. On Joe Rogan, he called it the weave. He says he does the weave where he talks about one thing and then he stops and he talks about another thing and then he goes and he picks back up where he left off. I call it being incoherent, but I guess we all have our own terms for it.
Yeah.
I think one big reason that the Republican Party did start to switch their perspective on immigration was obviously 9/11 and September 11th. But another big factor, I think, is kind of going off of what you're saying with the media. Rush Limbaugh in particular is one that I remember, growing up and especially during Obama's first election, being in the South and having friends and family that listened to Rush Limbaugh, hearing the things that this man was saying about a presidential candidate was so absurd and so ridiculous. And over time, obviously, as the internet expanded and whatnot, it gave rise to people with more ridiculous perspectives.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a huge reason why Trump is president today. It is kind of just one of those things where there is no more standard of like decency with what is being said or how it's being said or what the effects of it are going to be.
Yeah, you're too young to remember this, right? But Rush Limbaugh, and you can go back and check this, right, was advocating for like the longest time about he wanted to be one of the analysts on, the football shows, before the games. You got like Terry Bradshaw and Howie Long and all these guys are on the show. And I can't remember what network it was. I don't know if it was Fox or who it was, but one of them actually, okay, yeah, we'll let you do it, right? So they brought him on, like to kind of be like an analyst and talk about the games before. Yeah. I think he lasted about 3 weeks because he tried to do basically like on his show on there, right? And it just wasn't acceptable.
No.
And I think he called out, and I can't remember what quarterback it was. But, he basically said, well, he's not a good quarterback because he's black.
Wow. Yeah. But it sounds like Rush Limbaugh. I believe you. Sounds about right.
And so that was the end of his path there and in working on a football program.
When you said 3, I thought you were going to say 3 minutes. I thought he didn't even make it into the first broadcast.
He lasted like 2 or 3 weeks before they okay, I think we had enough.
Yeah.
Bad idea.
It's certainly a bad idea. I could have told you that. Going back on this football thing, we've talked about how Trump obviously ruined the USFL a couple times. Something that I learned watching a Stephen A. Smith interview the other day was that Trump tried to buy the Buffalo Bills back in like 2014. Yeah. And apparently he didn't have the money to be able to buy it. Yeah. And he got really mad at the NFL. Mm-hmm. And he told Stephen A. Smith that if he didn't get the Buffalo Bills, everyone was going to pay for it. Mm. And Stephen A. Smith was saying that he thinks that that's when he decided to run for president. And he told him that because, and this is my plea to the state of New York. Uh-huh. We have to give him the Buffalo Bills. Oh, we'll do a trade.
I don't know if the owner of the Buffalo Bills is ready to do that, or actually the Buffalo Bill fans actually want him. But Tim Kennedy, who's one of my colleagues there in Congress, kind of represents that area up there in Congress, and he's like a huge Bills fan. I don't think he would go with that.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't doubt that. I heard something else too, right? Is that, and this was a long time ago, but one of the reasons why he ended up, because he wasn't one of the original owners of the USFL, but he ended up buying the New Jersey Generals. Mm. which was ironically was the team that Herschel Walker played for, who ended up running for that Senate seat in Georgia, right down in your state. He is that he wanted to buy an NFL team back then, and he couldn't. So that was why he bought the USFL team, which is why he was so adamant too about the, no, we just can't be a summer league. We need to challenge the NFL.
Yeah.
Probably because he was pissed.
Everything goes back to ego with Trump.
Yeah.
It all goes back to his pride got hurt somewhere along the line, and you can trace it.
That's interesting. I mean, the other story that you kind of hear about, like why he decided to run for president, was because back in, I don't know what dinner, if it was the Correspondents' Dinner or whatever, right, where Obama, saw him in the crowd and or just kind of started, and he wasn't the only one, right? He was heckling other people or kind of ripping other people that were in the crowd. But, he went after Trump and made some jokes. And I think that was back when The Apprentice was kind of going, very strong for him. And so he, as anybody, right, who lives in a public life kind of becomes a target for to be made fun of and jokes and stuff. And he didn't like it, and that people say was when he decided that he was going to run for president.
No, I 100% would also. I think a decision like that probably takes multiple different factors, and I definitely do think that White House Correspondents' Dinner was one of those factors. Yeah. I remember too, because it's so, I think it highlights the difference between Donald Trump and Barack Obama. Because one of the key jokes there that Obama makes is, Trump keeps asking for my birth certificate. Well, I have a birth video, and he plays the scene from The Lion King where, they lift up the eye, and it's like, wow, he can laugh at this. Like he finds the humor in making fun of how ridiculous Trump is. The unfortunate thing that Obama didn't see was the fact that other people didn't think it was humorous. They thought it was real. They thought it was true. They thought that Obama wasn't born in the United States. And Trump used that and weaponized it against them. And now how we're seeing specifically with the case of immigrants, going back to what happened with Senator Padilla, is Republicans a lot in Florida in particular voted against their interests because now they don't have the people that they need to be able to run their companies. Again, there was an interview with a roofer down in South Florida, and he was talking about how 1/3 of his employees, I think it was 6 employees, were taken by ICE. And he's like, I voted for Trump, but I thought he was only going to come after the criminals. And these are good people.
Well, I mean, I've heard it from numerous groups, right? I won't put them on the spot right now by calling them out, but, that depend on immigrant labor, to support their businesses. And it's the same thing, right? It's like, well, I don't know. It's kind of like the idiots that, and I'll call them and I'll be kind of there, right? That married, have a spouse who's undocumented, and they're like voted for Trump, who said he was going to come after the immigrants, and then are shocked when, well, I didn't think he meant me. No, I think this is going to be a side tangent here, but I think that's something that does happen, particularly in my experience with some of my relatives that support Donald Trump and in the Hispanic community at large, is that they feel like by supporting him, they get some type of immunity. They'll be like, well, he's not going to come after me because I voted for him. I'd rather not go against him and maybe have the chance that he won't deport my husband. And it's so, like you said, idiotic, unfortunately. But one thing he sees every Latino person, whether you're here or not or whatever, to me, in my opinion, as just, you don't belong here. Yeah. Right.
I think he's just jealous of the tan.
He's
been trying to get it going for a while now. But that orange is not a good look on him.
That orange is not a good look.
No, definitely not. Especially when he get the goggles on and you can see what the color's supposed to be. It's just devastating for him. But going back to what happened with Senator Padilla, what was your reaction when you saw? How did you learn about that? And just for some quick context here, in case I guess someone might have missed it.
Well, yesterday, I think it happened when I was actually in the Armed Services Committee hearing where we had Secretary Pete Hegseth.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, kind of in front of us. He was there to testify. But that's when I got like a text just saying that, oh my God, they and I wasn't looking at my phone, right, because I was focused on the hearing. But then after I gave my questions and I pulled it out, and then I saw like what had happened, that Senator Padilla was arrested by ICE, and I was like, what? And so I actually left the hearing then so I could look at the video because I didn't want it to come on and then the sound. I usually have my phone turned off, but just in case, I didn't want it to like start playing with sound while I was in the hearing. So I left, and as soon as I left the thing, I looked and watched the video, and I was like, just in shock that they would arrest, like I said, our senior senator from California. But then you kind of think about it for a second, right? But you know what? They charged LaMonica McIver, right, from New Jersey, for basically doing nothing, kind of trying to say she was disrupting the process, of what was going on. They did the same thing to one of our labor leaders, David Huerta, who leads the largest union in California, SEIU. They arrested him and kept him in jail over the weekend. So, I guess then now you kind of start to think like, well, maybe I shouldn't be surprised by this, right? And it's like, who's going to be next? And I will tell you this, I've gotten all kinds of texts from people. It's like, hey, be careful. You need to take care of yourself. Somebody's like, you need to get a security detail now if you don't. But it is, it's just nuts. It is nuts.
Yeah. No, it is. I mean, anyone that is Hispanic, Latino, looks Hispanic, looks Latino, should be to some level, like you said, keeping their head on a swivel, looking around, making sure that, the environment that they're in is safe. And again, the unfortunate thing about it, going back to the irony of them saying that, Senator Padilla didn't identify himself, is that a lot of these people, a lot of these ICE agents are in plain clothing, like we've said.
Yeah.
So it's just even
wearing masks. I mean, it's nuts.
The mask thing makes me so upset in particular because I thought masks gave you brain damage.
Yeah.
I thought,
and these were the same people who were, a lot of the protests that were going on, right? I think like a year ago that were going on campuses and everything, and they were complaining about. Oh, look at the protesters and they're wearing their mask and everything, right? Show who you are, show yourself. But now all of a sudden it's okay.
It's every time. It's every single time. It's again, when it's inconvenient for them, they will say that it's a bad thing. And when it's convenient for them, they'll say that it's a good thing and that it's necessary. They're talking about how, well, now their ICE agents are being doxxed and this, that, and the other. And it's like, well, again, that's why people in these protests were covering up their faces, covering up their identity. And that tends to be why people do hide their identity during protests, right? So that there's no fallout afterwards. They understand that. They understand that that's why their ICE agents are doing it. But they like to spin the narrative. They like to spin the rhetoric. And one thing that they keep doing it with is saying that any protests against Donald Trump is like paid actors and they're funded by, George Soros or this, that, the other. And I think it is, again, it goes back to what I was saying with the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt. Whatever they say that they are doing, they're doing the opposite of. When they say they're being transparent, they're hiding something. When they say that the Democrats are paying protesters, pay attention. Because it's probably them that is paying protesters to go and wreak havoc in these peaceful protests that we're seeing in Los Angeles. As a matter of fact, when Donald Trump was giving his speech the other day at one of the, I don't remember exactly where it was, Max, if you could fact check this, but he was speaking to the military the other day. Not sure if you saw this, but the crowd behind him as he was speaking was cheering and, celebrating the things that he was saying. It was a kind of mask off moment for Trump. It was one of those speeches where you think, 60 years from now, you're going to look back at it and say, how did we not stop this then? Yeah. The interesting thing about it is he handpicked who sat behind him for that speech.
I know you can. Did you guys see that there was like some tweets and things that were going out yesterday that the instructions that they gave to the commanders, like they, you know, only supporters. If you're not a supporter, talk to your, you know, to your superiors about not going to the event because we don't want you there.
Yep.
Or they don't want you there. I mean, it was just like nuts, right?
Yeah.
You know, this is when a commander in chief goes, right. Anybody, yeah, like right there.
That's wild.
You know, checked for allegiance.
Yeah. Yeah.
The commander in chief, you know, what you expect, right? And you can go back and look, right? They're not making partisan political speeches, right? It's about kind of, you know, pumping up, you know, pumping up the military, right? Pumping up your service members, kind of giving them a, hey, love the job you're doing out here, right? Great, you know, great for serving your country, and thank you for making the sacrifice. That's what it's supposed to be about, not, you know, not to be there to kind of go and to rip your political rivals and to make a political speech. I mean, to him, this is just another campaign rally, but he's using the military as a prop.
Oh, no, it is a campaign rally.
Yeah.
Something that I saw too, because it gets worse.
Yeah.
He made the soldiers buy Trump merch. They bought a Trump hat and a white privilege card.
That I don't know that happened, but I do. What we've heard is that I don't know that he forced anybody to buy anything, but they had pop-up stands, you know, on the base. From what we heard, is to sell his merchandise.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, including white privilege cards.
Yeah.
Max, if you could pull this up, it's a post from Courier. That's a white privilege card is official Trump merchandise. It looks like a credit card, and it says white privilege on the top, and it's you're selling that as the president of the United States.
Yeah.
Like, there's supposed to be a punchline here. I feel like somewhere.
White privilege card trumps everything right there. Oh my God. You can buy that on Amazon?
I will say though, Trump's everything is pretty witty. That I will give them credit for, but everything else about it is just absolutely terrible. The
fact this was sold on a military base is absolutely insane.
Yeah, but you know they were doing it right on base. So supposedly that's being investigated now, right? But I mean, really, do you trust the Secretary of Defense to kind of come forward with any kind of legitimate thing where he's going to, you know, speak up against the prince? Like, you know, look, I was thinking about this the other day, and I kind of thought about mentioning it, but I was like, no, I'll just stick with what I already have planned. But, you know, the core values of the Navy and the Marine Corps, right? And I know he was an Army guy, but, you know, the core values were honor, courage, commitment, right? And part of the courage one was to be able to stand up, you know, for what you believe in and for what's right, even if you're speaking up against something that somebody else is like telling you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those are things that I still kind of take, you know, today, right? That I still think are important, right? Having the courage to speak up against something that's going wrong. And there's just no courage with, you know, all these people, right? And, you know, and it could be just the fact that, you know, I guess I guess they do. I guess they do. They just agree with him.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
So to them, you know, I guess putting down people or having second-class citizens because of your race or your sexuality, it's just, you know, horrible.
Well, to them, they think courage is offending people because you're walking around with a white privilege card.
Yeah.
That's what they think courage is. Courage, they think, is going against the counterculture. But again, I think the most American value is courage.
Yeah.
When we go back to the American Revolution, that took courage to stand up to the largest empire. The sun never sets on the British Empire.
Yeah.
And they said, you know what? It will today.
Yeah.
And we gained our independence. When the Founding Fathers came together, they acknowledged courage in the Second Amendment, right? They said that we're putting this here to stand up against a tyrannical government in the case so that people have the courage and the ability to be able to do that. Again, like you're saying, there needs to be some more, not calling for the Second Amendment to be invoked or any type of violence, but there needs to be more military leaders and more people that are just having the courage to say this is wrong, because it just is.
Yeah, and look, I think there's always a thing, right? It's like, hey, I'm just, the military, right? You're kind of taught not to question orders, and we kind of talk about that all the time and everything, right? But having the courage to speak up or anything, right? In the end, they're always going to follow the orders, right? But they should at least kind of put forward. And look, and this is what Secretary Esper did, in the last administration, and General Milley, because everything they're doing now, they wanted to do in the first Trump administration, right? They wanted to send in the military after when the riots were going on, after the George Floyd death, and but they were talked out of it, right? Secretary Esper, like, oh, we don't think that's a good idea. General Milley, we don't think that's a good idea. They wanted to do it back then, but the difference is now they got people that, instead of kind of like, well, let's talk about this and talk it through, and when we tell you why it's not a good idea, just that people are just saying yes, okay, all right, how many do you want to send?
Yeah,
and they pulled the 2,000 number out of their ass. Because it's like, well, how many do we need? I mean, they said, well, we're going to activate 2,000. I think they activated 400. I think they sent 700 Marines, but they don't even know what they're doing, right? And they had no plan. I mean, we've heard things about how they're sleeping on the streets, or they're sleeping. They don't have any food to eat. They're giving them MREs. It was just kind of no logistical plan or anything kind of put forward into this to kind of support the service members that are out there right now.
Yeah, they didn't even have respect for the service members when they sent them in. Like you said, there's no plan.
And a lot of them that just went right from the National Guardsmen, who were there kind of working on the mission to protect the Palisades and God, what's the other city? I can't think of the other city right now. But those areas that got burnt down in California, right? They were there to kind of ensure that those areas weren't looted, and that people weren't coming in to like go into these houses that people couldn't get into, right? To protect their valuables and to ensure to keep the looters and everything out. Now they just got put into this situation, right? After being activated for like months. Now it's like, as they were getting ready to go home, it's like, oh, no, now you're coming over here.
Yeah. I mean, when we knew that Trump didn't have any respect for the military since the first time that he ran. Yeah. He made fun of Gold Star families. He made fun of John McCain. He has this history.
Well, his comment that he said in the first time was like, well, he goes, I know more than the generals and admirals, right?
Yeah.
Just because I guess he spent a few years at military school when he was in high school, I guess that all of a sudden makes him a military leader and authority.
It's just because he's an arrogant piece of shit. But the thing with the whole administration is beyond just using the military for performative actions. It's everything that they do. Everything is performative with the intention of being provocative. Mm-hmm. You made a good example of Christy Nome, Ice Barbie. Mm-hmm. One thing that I hate now is, you probably experience it all the time because you're in the airport, flying between here and Los Angeles. Ice Barbie is on those screens.
Oh, yeah.
She loves to see herself. Yeah. It is so, it looks almost dystopian, right? You walk in and you see, especially in the Atlanta airport, because they have screens on screens on screens on screens for every lane. It'll be a couple rows. Mm-hmm. And so you just walk in and it looks like Big Brother is watching you, but it's just Ice Barbie on all of these screens. Yeah. And it's the same thing with Donald Trump and the fact that he wanted to have, people that were cheering for him behind him while he's giving his speech. Apparently, I also saw that for this military parade that they're doing tomorrow, actually, for Trump's birthday, again, an appeal to his ego. They're doing the same thing where they're offering $1,000. It's a group called Fight, Fight, Fight. And they're offering $1,000 in crypto to individuals that will go and show support for Donald Trump. They have specific requirements. They want some of them to be people of color, actually, and they're framing it as like a PR thing. Like they're like, oh yeah, we want to have some representation there. Yeah. Again, they give away their playbook by speaking too much. Yeah. All the criticisms that they have about everyone else is an insecurity about them being caught for doing something that they're not supposed to be doing.
Yeah, no, this supposedly it's supposed to rain tomorrow. We'll see. Let's keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah, well,
and see
that's
how that
God
goes.
telling you something right there.
Yeah. And the Pope is doing a rival kind of event in Chicago to kind of, I think at the same time. We're doing a town hall tomorrow, although ours is in the morning. But it is, I kind of thought it interesting. Like they made the parade, it's supposed to start at like 6 p.m. So it's like prime time, right? Like so they can show it prime time, on television or something right in the afternoon.
I just think it's because that's when Donald Trump wakes up, probably.
Yeah, probably could be.
Yeah.
But I'm surprised he's actually staying in town. Usually he leaves to go play golf right on the weekends. But
yeah.
It is, it's just crazy. And it's going to cost $40 million, they said, right? And the Secretary of the Army, who was in last week to testify, was like, we see it as a recruiting tool. I'm like, well, don't you think that $40 million would be better spent on some type of campaign?
I think you
towards
could
recruiting, like ads, commercials, things
or like a
that.
bonus. Like if you just dedicate, new recruits get a $10,000 bonus.
Yeah.
You do that, that's better than this $40 million, dollars being thrown away essentially for a military parade.
Time for a quick message from our sponsors.
This episode of Who Dem is brought to you by Elect Dems Now. We all know that podcasts are the future. They give us the chance to connect with our elected officials like never before. That's why Elect Dems Now is committed to helping voters engage with the people who represent us. Supporting organizations that bring us closer to our elected officials is crucial to advancing and advocating for the change we want to see. Whether it's $5 or $50, every donation to Elect Dems Now helps shape our future and ensures a country we can all be proud of. Your support sends a clear message to candidates and elected officials. Connecting with you means connecting with America. To contribute and make a difference, visit electdemsnow.org today. Your donation helps build a world where we are all connected. Paid for by Elect Dems Now, electdemsnow.org, not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. So I want to kind of pivot off of this, going into all of these different things that Donald Trump is doing are upsetting some of his, supporters, some of his base. And one thing that I've seen a lot of people, particularly on the internet, do is, when these stories come out of someone, saying that they are being inconvenienced by their decision to vote for Trump, a lot of people are saying, well, they deserve it. They voted for Trump and they deserve it. And I'm going to be honest with you, a part of me does feel that way. A part of me does want, it makes me mad. It's like, man, he said what he was going to do for 8 years and you still voted for him. How can you not see it? But then another part of me thinks, how can we make them see the light now?
Well, we're all made to suffer, right? So you tell that person well, hey, you got what you deserve. But at the same time, we're all we're having to pay for this as well, right?
Yes, yeah.
Because it's not just affecting him, it's affecting us as well.
Yeah.
Everybody who didn't vote for him. And look, it's a diversion, right, that he is creating. The economy's going bad. The tariffs are bad. He's not making the deals. He's still got 2 wars that are going on that he said he was going to do in 2 years. He had his big breakup with Elon Musk, and then the taco. Now he's being labeled the taco. And so he's like, well, how do we get, he's doing all this to create a diversion. And something actually I heard yesterday, actually I saw it on the news on one of the talk shows that I thought was a really good point was, he's only doing this he's doing it in California, right? That he doesn't like California. He doesn't like California's policies. He doesn't like the governor of California. So he's doing this, right? And he's talking about where they're going to do it in other cities, right? But he's talking in Illinois, Seattle, all blue states.
Mm-hmm.
Is Georgia not, one of the red states? Is Texas not one of the red states that depends on agriculture? And there's a number of them, right, where the same workers, where they depend on this immigrant labor as well. He's not going there.
No.
He's not ever talking about going there.
No, yeah. And it's another argument that I've heard, and I haven't really looked into it, and I don't personally agree with this perspective because I don't think anyone should be arrested for that. But it is very interesting that, Trump is going after the laborers. Mm-hmm. Someone has said, why don't they go after the business owners? Why don't they go after, because these are the people that fund Trump.
Right.
A lot of them are the people
yeah.
that are giving money to his
Yeah.
campaign. And so, it's a lot easier to go after the people that, frankly can't, like you've mentioned on the podcast, advocate for themselves or speak
Right.
for themselves
Yeah.
or can't vote, can't represent themselves, or don't have the money to be able to do so. It's a lot easier to go after them than to, stir up a fight with someone else. But going off of this, how do you think the Democratic Party can win some of these voters back that are now becoming disillusioned with Trump?
Look, I think we got to start talking about the economy, right? And this is the thing that, it's still very basic politics, I think, is that people vote their pocketbook, right? They think for whatever reason, and a lot of it I think is just propaganda, that they think somehow they're going to be better off with Republicans in charge. But, let's look. George H. Bush, when he left, we were in a recession, right? He had a recession right there, right? And then, after that, the Republicans made this pledge that they were never, ever going to raise taxes, right? Even if it was needed or it would help the economy. George W. Bush, we had the mortgage crisis, right? That pretty much, the whole too big to fail, right? The mortgage crisis that threw all the banks, and it was horrible, and made the economy right there. And so you talk about like who was made to suffer then, right? It was the working people of America were the ones that had to suffer while the banks all got bailed out. And then Trump, right? Again, they want to talk about how they had. I was watching something the other day about they had the lowest employment ever, which was totally not true, because it actually was lower under President Biden than it was at his lowest point there when Trump was president in his first term. But he left the economy in shambles, right? And people say, "Oh, well, it's like it was because of COVID." But if you're going to take credit for how good the economy was when basically you just inherited a very good economy from Obama and really did nothing. You got to you got to be responsible for when things turn to shit.
Yeah.
Right.
But there's no accountability.
And it totally turned to shit when he was there. Right. And a lot of it was because, he just refused to act because he wanted to act like nothing was going on. Oh, no, we're going to be okay. The pandemic, it'll probably last like a week, it'll be done in a week.
Yeah.
He didn't want to face reality, and his refusal to act or to delay things just kind of, perpetuated what all the horrible things that happened in the economy towards the end of his term.
It's his ego.
Yeah.
It's the fact that scientists that have the prefix doctor came in and told him, hey, you know what, this is a serious threat.
Yeah.
And he went, well, you know what, I'm smarter than you.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. And you're saying it with the economy. Donald Trump just took this lie that Republicans, spread with the economy and extended it to everything else. He has the biggest crowd size. He has the best this, the best that. He's the best golfer. He just takes it with everything.
Yeah.
And going off of this, do you think that then, obviously, I do 100% agree that talking about the economy and having a hyper emphasis on how we can provide economic support, relief, and opportunity for the American people is the way forward for the Democratic Party. Do you think that extends into other issues like immigration as well? Should we be highlighting the fact that if Donald Trump goes through with his mass deportation, over the next 10 years, we will lose $1 trillion in our GDP, 1.3%?
I think that's all, into the economy too, right? Right. When you, like I said, we had the agricultural groups, right, come and talk to us earlier this week. If they don't have the workforce to not only harvest the food, right, but also to process the food, it is going to have a dramatic effect. Not only, it's going to have a dramatic effect on the price of food, right? If they're having to let food rot on the, in the fields because they can't harvest it, if they're not able to process it because they don't have the workforce. And they said, they told me that they've had times where they've had, because of what's going on, where they've had specifically one of the groups that was talking about watermelons, where they just basically had to throw it away.
Yeah.
But if you have, it's a supply and demand issue, right? If you have less of a supply, the price is going to go up.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just frankly what it is.
Yeah.
And that's for like everything. And so it is an effect, right? It will have an effect. But, we have to let people know that when you go back to Biden, right? And I know people were kind of mad about inflation, but again, the inflation that occurred at the beginning of Biden's administration was something that he inherited from Trump, right? And by the end, it actually did, go down. But I have guys said the infrastructure bill put so many people to work that they never had so many jobs and everything that were going on. This was something that Republicans voted against, but yet when the money came into their district, they were touting the projects about how hey, I brought this money in, I brought this work. This is what we're doing, right? The economy under Obama, right? He had to deal with the mortgage crisis, right, that happened during the Bush administration, right? The automobile industry that almost kind of, here in the United States, that almost kind of went under. He had to fix that, and then it improved and it got better. And, these are things that they are looking to go and to make a change. I know people don't want to hear this, right? But we only buy trucks here, right, in the United States. We're not selling them in Europe. We're not selling them in Asia. And the way that we've been able to kind of work with our partners in Canada and in Mexico in order to help keep the price of the trucks affordable so that people can buy them, it is part of the process, and it's worked, and it's enabled people to be able to buy these items here. But if we're going to do what he wants to do, the price is going to go up.
Yeah.
And who's that going to be good for? Because people aren't going to be able to buy them. So they're going to make less. So it's going to put people out of work. This is the destruction that he's causing with his economic policy, right? But we have to know that when Democrats have been in office, it has been better for the workforce. Unemployment has been down. The economy has gotten better. People have thrived during this time. People are still kind of thinking about Reagan. But that was Reagan.
Yeah.
That was back then. And that, the economy that he had during that time, right, it worked. But the last three Republican presidents after him have not done that.
Nope.
They haven't been able to duplicate it. They haven't been able to repeat it. And this is what you're getting now. You're not getting Reagan, right? Who was, again, right, we talked about, championed immigration and about how the American dream and how we need that workforce to come here.
Yeah.
That's not happening.
No. And I think that Trump told us what he was planning on doing when he said, "Make America Great Again." Mm-hmm. And it's really, I don't understand the contradiction from Republicans or from, conservatives, Americans, people that hold this perspective where it's, we want to make America great again. Why don't we want to make America greater? You talk about making America great again, and then they're bringing back manufacturing jobs, which is, okay, we need manufacturing here in the United States, and we need to support manufacturing employees. But the idea was that we were going to do high-level jobs. We were going to educate our populace. We were going to, get into we weren't going to be screwing little screws into iPhones like one of the Trump administration officials said. Mm-hmm. We weren't going to be having Americans work these jobs. Another reality that a lot of people don't account for, talk about enough, in my opinion, is not only are these jobs difficult, these jobs that immigrants do, not only are they difficult, the conditions that they have to work in a lot of times are not great conditions. Mm-hmm. I think of specifically back home in Georgia, there was there was a chicken plant that got in trouble because instead of paying for air conditioning, they paid for an ambulance to be outside waiting for when an employee would get heat stroke.
Yeah.
And they said that it was cheaper to pay for the ambulance and to take them to the hospital because they don't have to pay for the ambulance when, driving them. They don't have to pay for the hospital bill.
Yeah.
So they just offload that cost to the immigrant. And I don't want anyone working those jobs, and we need to make these jobs better for people that are working them. But I certainly don't want Americans working these jobs in these conditions. We have to improve those, and we have to up the standards here in the United States if we want to make America greater.
Yeah, no, I mean the economy, the industry, everything is changed here, right? This isn't, this isn't the '50s, right, where you can go across the street and, like I said, my grandfather, quit high school at 16, but he was able to go across the street and went to the steel plant and got a job. Those times, it's not like that anymore. And so our workforce has changed, right? And what's required of it has changed. And this is why education is so important, is that we need to educate our, citizens, our people here for the jobs of the future and the jobs of now. Right?
Yeah.
That's what we need to do. That's where we need to focus. That's why we need to kind of, I think, partner with industry. And education and industry should be a partnership to make sure that not only are we educating our kids, right? Making them literate and smart and be able to do the things, but also preparing them for the future of where the jobs are.
Yeah, I think that there needs to be a radical change to our education system in the United States. One thing that I had, the privilege of being able to do is there was one of two schools in Forsyth or in Georgia, and the high school that I went to was a career-focused high school. Yeah. And the way that it worked is exactly how you're saying. Instead of, we received public funding, and then on top of that, we also received funding from the businesses. Right. But the businesses gave the school funding with the understanding that the school was going to train us to go and be interns at these businesses. So since it was career-focused, you could study law, you could study, there was healthcare, there was engineering, there was also, I forget the term for it, but like flying planes and whatnot. Yeah. And so there was a bunch of different career paths that you could go down. And my question then is, from a policy perspective, do we need to start coming up with ideas of how to implement this?
I'm reading right now, the book John Adams by David McCullough. And you were talking about the founding fathers earlier, but and I have a master's degree in urban education policy, right? So, but this is something I didn't know, right? John Adams wrote the Constitution for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and in that Constitution, he actually put in that education was a responsibility there of the state, and it needed to be focused, or you need to make sure that it was funded and everything, right? And when I heard that, I thought, you know what? That actually makes sense in the fact that why Massachusetts has the #1 education system in the country.
Wow.
Yeah, it's because they have an emphasis on that, and it's a responsibility of the state to support public education. Yeah. Now, I mean, all states do it, right? But that was kind of like a thought in there from the beginning that, at a time when education wasn't, something that everybody got.
Yeah,
right?
it goes back to the American value of courage.
Right.
The courage to test out novel ideas and to implement them and to set them forth is an American value. Yeah. And that's the other thing, too, when we're talking about the economy. The thing is, so many things are tied into the economy. When you improve education, you improve the economy. Right. The interesting one is healthcare, right?
There was a, what was it? This was, I remember the number, and I got to check and see what it is now, but I remember back in, I think it was like 2017 or 2016, I remember reading some information about the country gets a 3-to-1 return, or at least at that time, it's probably higher now, but got a 3-to-1 return when it invested in education, all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, in higher education, when every dollar that was invested in an individual for higher education, they got a 3-to-1 return on that.
And
that's the importance of scholarship, Pell Grants, and kind of doing this thing, right, of helping that individual, achieve that goal. you're going to get there's a return on that.
That's the reality of a lot of what's it called, of social safety nets here in the United States. Matthew Desmond does a great job of highlighting it. He talks about how for I think it's every dollar, Max, please fact check me on this because I know that the statistic is actually crazy, so I don't want to misrepresent it, but I think it's for every dollar that we invest in, I don't remember if it was food stamps or some social safety net, we get $68 in return or $63 in return. So that,
because when what you're doing, right? So let's take like SNAP, our program, or even like school lunches, right? Title I school lunches, feeding kids at school to making sure they have a meal right there. Not only are you feeding the child, make sure that they get a meal, right, which is going to improve their ability to learn there, but also these programs, you're also supporting the farmers. Right, who are growing that food, right? You're supporting
local farmers too.
You're supporting the workers who work there at the plant that process it and do everything it needs to do to get it to where it can be taken by the child, and by helping to feed the child, to educate the child. It is this whole process is a return, right? And you're getting that return on that investment that you go just by, feeding those children there at school.
Yeah. And again, a lot of these things are investments that we make now that we don't see until the future.
Yeah.
It's
like that's what an investment is.
Yeah,
right. You got to play the long game.
Yeah, and that's I think the problem with politics in the past 10 years from conservatives have been very much immediate results and want something quick, and I want it now, and we're going to fix we're going to rearrange the entire global economy and how it operates in a month. We're going to call it Liberation Day, as a matter of fact.
So I went and visited last District Work Week. We went and visited a early Head Start program, and several of the people that were there, right? I think one of the superintendents and other leaders and supporters of the program were talking about how they were part of Head Start when they were growing up, right? But this is kind of what it's led to. This is why early education is so important, right? It is an investment and it pays dividends in the future.
Yeah.
Of because you're going to get highly educated, capable people when you invest in these programs.
Yeah, producer chiming in here, actually. My girlfriend is going into education, and she's going into her master's degree now, and was actually volunteering at Jumpstart, a pre-K program that was cut in the middle of the semester.
Yeah. So,
that affected her, it affected a lot of the other people that she was working with, and discouraged a lot of the people she was working with from going into teaching.
Yeah, it is. Early education is so important, right? And it is. And there's so much data and information about how the results that it produces, and that when you invest in early education, it really is a positive thing, and it is going to pay dividends in the future for the individuals that are part of this program.
One thing that I've seen become more popular that I hadn't really heard of until recently. Gotcha.
Yeah.
One thing that I hadn't seen until recently was this idea of universal childcare. Or childcare before getting into pre-K. Is this an idea that you've seen anything about, or that you would know more about?
Well, I used to run. I don't want to say run, but I used to oversee the largest childcare system in the country, which is operated by the United States military. We had, I think, over almost 300,000 kids in our childcare program. And it is impactful, right? Because when you can have a child in childcare, right, and it's affordable, it can, it allows, the parents to work, right? It allows them to kind of go and to do things, right? And if you have a good program, they're going to help educate, the child as well, right? They're going to, especially those early years, it's teach them social skills, right? To the ability to kind of, to work and play with other kids is a learning tool for them, right? Yeah. And then they learn their ABCs, and they learned, how to count. These are things that are going to be there. Kindergarten's not when I went to kindergarten, you just dropped your kid off, right? And then there was a responsibility for them to kind of teach everything, right? When I was there, of the school to teach them. Now they want them to come in prepared. That they need to be able to count to 20. They need to know their ABCs. They should know be able to recognize, some words.
So you're telling me Trump could not get into kindergarten right now?
He probably couldn't. Yeah.
Well, on that note, Representative, thank you so much.
Yeah.
There are so many things going on, and it's an evolving news cycle.
Yeah.
So stay on alert, keep us informed. I'm loving the reels that I'm seeing come out from the different hearings and whatnot. And to the listeners, thank you so much for tuning into another episode of the Who Done Podcast.
All right. Thank you.